Welcome to From the Honeycomb podcast. I am your host, Katerina. Join me as we explore stories of fearless female entrepreneurs and inspiring women in architecture, construction, engineering, and beyond. Each episode is a captivating blend of topics that resonate with the soul. Whether you're here to learn more about entrepreneurship, architecture, holistic living, or just need a little extra inspiration, you've come to the right place. So sit back, relax, and let the buzz of positive energy spark your curiosity. Welcome to the third episode of the Women in Architecture series. This year's theme focuses on the power of collaboration within the profession. Today, I'm excited to welcome Meg Coffee, a licensed landscape architect based in California with over 20 years of experience. In 2013, she founded her own landscape architecture firm, specializing in both residential and commercial projects throughout Los Angeles. Alongside her impressive design work, Meg also shares her expertise as an instructor for the landscape architecture program at UCLA Extension. She has also served twice as the president of the Association for Women in Architecture and Design, AWA+D. Meg, welcome to From the Honeycomb, and thank you for being a part of the Women in Architecture series.
Thank you so much.
And as you know, we begin every episode by sharing something that we are grateful for in the present moment. So what are you grateful for?
I am really grateful to have a community of really wonderful friends.
Aw, no, that's really great. And I think as an entrepreneur, I've been noticing more the friendships I've developed, even just within this last year, is just how important they are to have and the feedback you can get from them.
Yeah, both professionally and personally. I'm very lucky and grateful for that.
Oh, that's really great. Hi, it's me, Katerina. Before we jump into today's episode, I want to share with you something that can change the trajectory of your life. If you are ready to start your own architecture firm but are feeling overwhelmed by where to begin, I understand, because I felt the same way when I first embarked on my entrepreneurial journey. This is why I have created the ebook, The Mindful Blueprint for Launching Your Architecture Firm. This comprehensive workbook contains everything I wish I had known before starting my own firm. From building a solid business plan to creating your brand, the Mindful Blueprint for Launching Your Architecture Firm offers a step-by-step guide tailored to your timeline, whether you're launching your firm today, next month, or in a few years. Dive into essential topics like financial planning, organization strategies, and how to secure your first client, all in one convenient resource. That's right, you don't have to spend hours researching. I have done that for you so you can focus on building your business. And that's not all. With your purchase, you'll also receive an exclusive meditation for business owners, mindfulness tips, a crystal guide for support, and gratitude exercises to help you stay focused and positive throughout your journey. Turn your dream of having your own firm into a reality with the Mindful Blueprint for Launching Your Architecture Firm. Click on the link in the show notes to get your copy today. Now, let's dive into the episode. Well, Meg, share with us your journey through, I guess what inspired you to become a landscape architect and then your journey to becoming one.
Yeah, I guess it's an interesting story. I was not inspired to be a landscape architect. I was inspired to be an architect. And I went to architecture school for a year, to graduate architecture school. And after that year, so I'd wanted to be an architect always.
Mm-hmm.
I was 7 years old and I watched a PBS thing about Frank Lloyd Wright. And I was just mesmerized. And I was like, oh my God, I want to do that. Mm-hmm. And my mom had a good friend who was an architect. And he gave me a book on all the different types of historical architecture houses, historical residential style architecture that I was fascinated with. And so I always wanted to be an architect, made that dream come true, went to graduate school in architecture for a year. Not the dream I thought it was going to be. There was also some personal stuff going on in my life that affected it, but it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. And so I started looking around for what was similar to architecture, but not architecture. Mm-hmm. And truth be told, the thing that got me with architecture was physics and dealing with moment frames and all of that. It's just oh God, I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
And so I, through just a lot of research and interviewing people and talking to people, I discovered landscape architecture. And the more I learned about it, the more I was like, oh, that kind of seems like exactly what I want to do. It's all the fun part of architecture. It's all the design and the creativity and the thinking about how people use a space. without all of the structural and physical
Yeah.
physics component. And it deals with nature, which I've always been an outdoorsy person.
Mhm.
And so after that, and at first when I first learned about landscape architecture, I was like, I hate going to nurseries. I'm not that interested in plants. I don't want to plant trees. Like, I don't want to dig in the dirt. Like, is that what I have to do? And so I learned that that's not what landscape architects do. And that landscape architects basically do what architects do. We just do it outside
Mhm.
and we do it a little bit more holistically. And so I was like, wow, this is really cool. And so I found a graduate school and went to grad school. And that was many years ago.
Wow. Nice. And so what did you study then for your undergraduate if you did architecture for graduate school?
I studied art history, studio art
Oh,
history.
nice.
It gave me a beautiful, very well rounded education. Couldn't really do anything with it and tried being, working in museums for a little while and discovered that that was all writing. And I
Mhm.
be a writer. I wanted to be like a creator of spaces.
Mhm.
So then, went to architecture school and then landscape architecture.
Nice. I was gonna say you're like a combination of my sister and I. She studied art history. I studied architecture. She
Uh,
now works at a gallery. She does a lot of the writing for the gallery. A lot of yeah, it was definitely more of a writing creative field. So that's
yeah,
so funny that you say that. Yeah,
yeah,
because art history is definitely it was something I was interested in architecture school, but I continued with architecture. So I like that. That's kind of a mix of my sister and I and you. I like that. Yeah. So you studied landscape architecture. You decided that was your career path. I know there's landscape architect. Actually, you might be the first landscape architect on the podcast because I don't think I've talked with anybody about your exam and your exam process. So, what is that like after landscape architecture school? When do the exams come in?
yeah. So it's very similar to architecture. And of course, like architecture, it varies state to state. And so I took my exam in the state of Texas because that's where I
Mm.
was at the time. And I guess I took it 3 years after I graduated.
Okay.
So I had to have, so much work experience and then I could sit for the exam. And this was back pre 2000 is how long ago this was. And so we didn't do the exams on the computer. We had to go, we went to downtown Austin because they only offered them in the capital cities of each state.
Oh,
So
wow.
I lived in Houston at the time, but I had to go to Austin because that's the state capital, go to the big building. And yeah, I sat for 3 days taking the
Wow.
exam. And this
Wow.
was, pencil and trace, and I had my scales and my little like portable Mayline, and because we had to draft and do all that sort of stuff. And so yeah, I had to take it more than once, and one section in particular more than twice, and then got licensed. So it's a very similar process.
Nice,
Yeah.
nice. I do remember hearing that exams used to be pen and paper, and I think there's so much more value in that because of how we as architects, landscape architects, as we design, I think so much of it makes more sense. I think there's this like discontinuity. We don't even need to talk about that, but in detail, but there is the level of how much computer work there is for the exams now. It just seems it's very, very different. So, in a way, I wish I had drafted. I think I would have been more successful at my exams because I failed so many of them that I think I would have been more successful drafting than in a computer system.
Yeah. I don't think it really matters. It's hard. They're just
Yeah.
hard either way.
No, they are. So you got your license and then walk us through obviously eventually you moved to California. So what was that journey like? And then I also want to talk about when you started your own firm as well.
Yeah. So I can sort of cover all that in one big story. So I went to Louisiana State University. So that's where I graduated from. And I had a job before I graduated, which was
Oh,
great.
nice.
So we had I think LSU still does this, but every year we had something that was called Design Week. And
Mhm.
I forget what semester it was. I think it was in the spring semester. We would have an alum, usually an alum, not always, but some person out in the field that's practicing as a landscape architect would come to the school and we would mix undergrads and graduates and we would cancel classes for a week. And we would basically have a charrette for a full
Mm.
week. And so the project and everything was brought in by this guest professor. And so this particular year, it was Jim Burnett, who is a graduate from LSU. And so he came in, and I was put on a team with some undergrads, and I think I was the only grad student on the team. They all flaked. And so it was left with me and one undergrad. And that guy and I like put together this whole project and built a model and did this thing. And oddly enough, it was a project out here in California. It was a Kaiser Permanente hospital. And we were, our task was to come up with a design for the grounds. And so this guy and I came up with this whole design, and I gave the presentation at the end of the week. And Jim Burnett was apparently very impressed and offered me a job, like on the spot. And yeah. And so I was like, well, I'm working on my thesis right now. I kind of need to finish that, and then I can come work for you. And so I finished my thesis in October, and I started working for him like November 1st. So started my career immediately. So that was in Houston. And at the time, he had just one office. I don't know how long he had been in practice, less than 10 years probably. And there were two other landscape designers in the office. And then he hired two young architects to come do all the computer drafting, because this was in the late 1990s. So we weren't doing AutoCAD quite yet. And it was sort of new on the scene, and only like the young undergrad architecture students knew it. And so I worked for him for a little bit, and then worked for a few other landscape architects in Houston. Along the way, met a man, fell in love, got married, then decided that I didn't really want to work anymore, that I wanted to teach. So I started applying for teaching jobs, and I got an assistant professor job with Texas Tech University. So beginning tenure track.
Nice.
And so my then husband and I moved to Lubbock, Texas, which is out in far West Texas. And I spent the next 3 years teaching undergrad architecture, landscape architecture classes. And then realized that needed more work experience in order to be a better teacher, because I'd only worked for 3 years and then started teaching. And so I wasn't even licensed yet.
Okay.
And I was teaching landscape architecture, and just sort of realizing like, oh, I should probably know more about like what I'm doing. So that would make me a better teacher. And so then my husband and I decided to, not do the teaching thing anymore, that I wouldn't do that, and to start working again. He, meanwhile, was practicing landscape architecture, had decided that he wanted to pursue computer animation, got into USC, and that's how we got out here to California.
Okay.
And then got out here to California, lived here for, I guess, about 6 years, and then got divorced. And we're both still in California, but just doing our own things. So he's still doing computer animation as far as I know, and I'm still doing what I do. And so came here, I got a job before we moved out here that was for a one-man firm in Westlake Village. And I didn't know anything I'd never been I'd been to California, I'd never been to LA, never wanted to live in LA, never wanted to live in California. Thought I was going to spend my days in Texas, and came out here, worked for that firm for a while, then went to Marmol Radziner, where I was there for 5 years, and it was an amazing experience. Most of my friends, for whom I'm grateful for, I met through my experience at that firm. And then the Great Recession happened in 2008.
Yep.
And I got laid off in 2010, and then made do for about a year being unemployed. And that's sort of what inspired me to then open my own practice finally.
Wow. No, it's always interesting to hear how entrepreneurs and business owners, like what was that turning point for them? And I've been noticing is that pattern of around the recession time, it makes sense why so many people decided to start their own firm. So for you, was it kind of like a gradual decision, or was it more of a sudden, like, I think this is what I'm going to do?
It was more of a, it's, what is the phrase, or what's the saying? Necessity is the mother of invention, or something like that. So in this case, I would say that necessity is the mother of entrepreneurship. And it wasn't really by my choice necessarily. It just happened. And I was unemployed. I'd moved to Philadelphia for 16 months, because I couldn't get a job here in LA, got a job in Philadelphia, moved to Philadelphia, thought that's where I was going to spend the rest of my life, and that Philadelphia was going to be my long lost home. Was not. Hated it.
Mm.
Hated the East
Cold.
Coast. Cold, gray, dismal,
Yep.
awful, terrible. Came back to the West Coast where my friends are and the sun shines and
Hmm.
it's hot as can be, but
Yes.
usually it's not. And so came back to the land that I love and decided that I was never leaving Los Angeles again and had a job, got laid off again in like 6 months because it was still, this was now in 2012. So
Hmm.
still kind of recovering from the recession. Got laid off for a second time, and I was just like, "Oh my gosh, what is going on?" And maybe I should do something else. If this is the fate of landscape architects, just get laid off twice in 2 years, maybe this is not what I should do. But I didn't know what else to do because that's what I was trained to do. That's all I had done. I had no idea what else to do. And so I just kept plugging at it and taking all these, just basically any job I could that was remotely related to landscape architecture, and just cobbled together some stuff. And then I don't even really know how it happened. I just started getting work.
Hmm.
And I was working for a company that doing building inspections just to sort of have a paycheck.
Hmm.
And I was doing drafting for a lighting designer. And then I was teaching, like I was teaching at UCLA Extension, teaching whatever class they would let me teach. And so I taught like every quarter for 2 years in a row. And so I was just, doing whatever I could. And then I don't know, it was like one day I got a pretty big commission and I was like, I think I might be able to do this. Let's see if I can get another project. And then got another project and that's, 11 years later, still getting new projects. So I
That's amazing.
guess this is what I'm doing. Yeah.
Oh, well, it's always amazing and inspiring to hear, just what that journey is like because, I know so many of my listeners, resonate with being entrepreneurs or in the architecture field or construction or engineering. And so hearing, I think your story too is really inspiring that you did take all these like different jobs still within like the field of architecture, construction, engineering, all that, but you did just take what you could. And I think that was also a huge lesson for you. And I'm sure even those odd end jobs, you did learn something about whatever that profession was.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Some of them were pretty low level and
Hmm.
they were certainly not what I wanted to do. But, there was one that I did that I was making $25 an hour.
Wow.
And, but at least that was $25 an hour, which was better
Hmm.
than zero. And
Hmm.
so I just kind of did whatever I could. And
No.
yeah, I had jokes with friends that I was like, yeah, I'll do anything for a buck. I was like,
Goes,
not anything,
yeah.
but
No, I know. I know.
anything landscape architecture related, I'll do for a buck.
No, it goes back to I can't remember the quote you just said too about necessity. I
Yeah.
think it goes back to that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I was fortunate too because my dad, he was self-employed
Mm-hmm.
and I had grown up around that. So I did have a model and
Mm-hmm.
so I wasn't completely lost. He was already gone by the time I opened my own practice, but it would have been great to like share stories and talk with him about how do I do this? What do I do? But,
Mm-hmm.
I recalled a lot of what he had told me through the years growing up and applied a lot of that same knowledge.
That's really great to hear and inspiring. And one thing I also want to come back to is I think because you were able to work with like an inspector and you did like lighting plans, how did that influence? Since I know the theme of the series this year is about collaboration, did that experience working these odd end jobs help you with your collaboration in the future with all of a sudden you are meeting with an inspector, you kind of have an idea of what they do or a lighting plan. Now you kind of know what goes into it. Did any of those past experiences too help you in collaborations in the future?
That's an interesting question. I don't know that it really helped me with collaboration. I think
Mhm.
it's helped a lot with communication and
Mm.
also maybe I think it affects the way that I design
Mhm.
because I think more about, because I do know a little bit more about lighting. I do know a little bit more about construction, a little bit more about maintenance. And so I do think about those aspects in a different way and probably more practically. And so I think it changes the way that I design a little bit. And then it also was also a humbling experience because these different professions, yes, they're allied professions. And and I don't know everything there is to know about those things. I know a lot about landscape architecture,
Mm.
but I don't know, like the inspector job, I had to like go up on the roof and take inventory of HVAC equipment, like the model numbers and how many SEERs it is and whatever, whatever. I don't know. I don't know that stuff.
Yeah, no, same.
I don't know. And like plumbing stuff. And like I had to inspect a grocery store where I'm like
Oh my
looking
gosh.
at industrial refrigerators and so I don't know what these things are.
Yeah.
And so it was really eye-opening and humbling just to realize that I there's a lot about a lot that I don't know. And
Mhm.
so I think I should say I like to think that it makes me a little bit better at collaborating because I'm more interested in, wanting to communicate and I'm not the one who knows everything and help me help you to understand what this is and let's work together and help each other because you don't know what I'm doing and I don't know what you're doing and sort of come at it with that attitude.
No, absolutely. It is. The industry that we are in is so collaborative from the engineers, the contractors, you have the landscape architect, and you have the client, you have the interior designer. I mean, there's so many people that come into it.
Yeah, and I think namely the client.
Yes.
That's what I really focus on is and what I always tell prospective clients is that I like to work very collaboratively, that it's not just that I'm going to give you a design and this is what we're going to do. It's going to be a back and forth and we're going to go through things. We're going to rework things and that it is that collaboration.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And so, where in this timeline does AWA plus D fit in? Because that's actually how we've met. I'm a member of AWA plus D. So, how did you find the association? And then share about how you became a part of it.
Yeah. So I started my own business officially in 2013.
Hmm.
And that also happens to be the year that I joined AWA plus D.
Nice.
And for obvious reasons, it's a group of architects. I'm a landscape architect. I depend a lot on architects for referrals and also to collaborate with. And so I thought, well, if I'm going to do this independent, own office thing, I got to like get out there and make some connections. And I don't know, I got an invitation, I guess, online to that year's symposium. And back then, symposium was a much more casual affair, and it
Hmm.
was like a half day, and it was downtown somewhere, and there was a speaker or two, like some panel, and we had breakfast and lunch, and then sort of network, and then you leave. And so I was like, oh, well, maybe I'll go to this. And I asked I have some friends that are architects. And I was like, hey, have you all ever heard of this organization? And they're like, yeah, well, it's been around for a while. We've never done anything with it. But yeah, you should totally go. You should, it's great. You could meet some people, whatever. And so I went, and it just seemed like such a great organization.
Hmm.
And the thing that impressed me the most, honestly, was the food. The food spread was
Yes,
amazing.
it always is.
Always amazing.
It
And
is.
the people were really nice. Like all
Hmm.
the other women were just really welcoming. And then we had this amazing food because I was expecting like, oh God, it's going to be this ladies' luncheon and it's going to be like
Yeah.
these tiny little portions and some salad, something, something. And I go and it's like racks of barbecue and just really great stuff. And there's like
Mhm.
wine and mimosas and I was just like, wow, these are like real ladies.
Yes.
This is what, okay, these are the kind of people I want to hang out with.
Hmm.
And everybody was, we all were in the same field. We had similar stories. We had similar educational backgrounds, similar goals in life. And it was just really supportive and lovely. So I was like, I think, well, oh, at that time too, when you signed up for symposium, so symposium was, I think it was like in September back then, you got like that last month for free, and
Oh,
then you got the
nice.
whole year. And
Mm.
so when you paid for symposium, you sort of automatically got your membership.
Nice.
And so I was like, oh, well, that's a deal.
Mm.
Like, I'll just do that. And then, so I was like, well, I'm a member of this organization. I might as well start doing stuff.
Mhm.
And so I went to more and more events and started knowing people. And as you know, once you meet certain people and you are fairly regularly active, you get roped into doing other things.
Yes. I have a recent experience with that, yes, for sure. And so, how did you get involved then? Because I know, like, we meet at the end of every month. So here's a quick plug for if any woman is listening who is an entrepreneur or is thinking about having her own small business. At the end of every month on Wednesday from 8:30 to 9:30 Pacific Standard Time, we have a Zoom call which Meg hosts, and we just kind of have a casual time where we talk about questions we have, concerns, things we're dealing with, and just kind of getting advice. And I think that has been a huge support network for me in my first year of having my own firm because I've always am interested in the women who show up. Everybody has really interesting stories. They're not just architects, there's interior designers and like you're a landscape architect. And I think that's a really great, collaborative space too as well. And it's just you feel so supported because like this last month I mentioned, I was like, oh, it's kind of a lull period and we talk about that and you feel less alone, which is really great with that group.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear that. It's fun to host too.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I got involved more at the active level, I guess. So I roped one of my friends into AWA plus D, and then that friend was roped into being membership director. And so she was membership director for a year or two. I know at least a year, and she may have even done it 2 years. And then she got pegged as vice president.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I told her, she's one of my dearest best friends. So I told her, I said, well, when you're president, I'll be your secretary. I'll be secretary when you're president. So she was like, okay, great. And so then sort of once you're on the board, you kind of are on the board. And so then I became secretary and I was secretary. I feel like I was secretary 2 years, but maybe I was just secretary 1 year. But I was, yeah, because her vice president was Audrey Sato. And then became Audrey's vice president. And then I was president. And then Sona was president. And then I became president again, sort of by a fluke, but I was not planning to be president again, but we had a resignation. The vice president resigned. So then we were in an emergency situation. And when I was president, it was in 2020.
Oh.
Yeah. And so we had one in-person event that year, and that was our annual meeting. So that was my last act as president was our one in-person event.
And was this your first term or second term?
It was my first term as
Oh
president.
my gosh.
Yeah. So then 2 years later, we were in an emergency situation because the vice president resigned. And I was like, well, I just did it and I didn't really get to do it because it was all virtual. So I'll be president again. I might, I would feel more like I was president. And so I was president again.
Yes.
And now we've had a president resign. So now I'm parliamentarian again.
Yes.
So
keep getting roped in.
I'm just in the repeat. Yeah.
And so can you share with us what is the role of a president in an organization like AWA plus D, which is a non-for-profit? What does that entail if somebody is interested in joining an organization, even AWA plus D?
Yeah. And I think at any level, it's a small organization. It's a local organization. We're the only one of its kind in the United States. So we don't report to a national thing like ASLA does or AIA or even NOMA. We're it. And so as president, I am the leader of the whole organization. And most of what that entails is getting good people around you, which I think is true of any president. They're only as good as the people they surround themselves with. Because as president, you lead, but you don't have to do a lot. You have a great team, and the team is really what does everything. You have the ideas and you delegate. And you get those ideas, you turn those ideas into action. And most of what you do as a president is delegate and maintain the peace and, preside over meetings. And it's a lot of that kind of stuff. But it is really great because you meet a lot of people. You get to practice those leadership skills I won't say a lot. There have been a few presidents that I've been active with, who my dear friend being one of those, who were a little reticent to be president because they considered themselves to be shy and maybe not comfortable being, the leader in a room or the head speaker. And they all just really found new confidence and found, this supportive group of women that really helped them grow. And they just, their whole manners, like if you met them before they became president and after they became president, you could just see the growth and the change of their personalities and just the way that they made decisions and held themselves and carried themselves and talked. So it gave them a lot of really great experience.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's
And
really great to hear.
and it has helped them professionally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which I was just going to ask, how has being part of AWA plus D helped you professionally? And it sounds like in your role as president, but also just being part of the organization.
Well, the easiest way to say it is what AWA does best is it makes connections. And so
Mm-hmm.
I've made a ton of connections. And so I collaborate a lot with other architects that I've met through AWA plus D. So I've worked with Sona, I've worked with Joanne Jackson, I've worked with Christine Monty, I've worked with Susan Gillespie, and all these women I didn't know before AWA plus D.
Mm-hmm.
And now, I've done projects with all of them. And
Wow.
with some of them, I've done more than one.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just been this great wealth of collaborators.
No, that's great to hear too, because I think someone like for me as well, starting out or, building my social network was something I really worked on this last year because that's how you get projects, you get through referrals. And the
Yep.
wider your social network through being part of these organizations, even local. So I'm in Orange County, obviously. So whenever I can come to your events, I do. But also having that network even in LA, and just I was able to collaborate with an interior designer from AWA plus D on a possible project. And so there's so many ways, and it's such a great way to connect with other. And what I like about AWA plus D is it is only women, which
Yeah.
just makes it so much more fun and comfortable. And we have amazing events. Like there
Yeah.
was salsa dancing, and we go to soccer games. Like it's not all just boring, meetings. And the
Yeah.
food, like you said, I remember. So last year was my first symposium, and I tried to get two of my friends to come this last year. And I said, if anything, come for the food.
The
Like the
food is so good. That salmon was so good.
it was.
It
It
was
was
so
so good. It's all it takes is good food to get us into a room.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah.
And we have our annual meeting on Sunday, and hopefully that's going to be good
Yes.
too.
Yes, we're test driving Rivians. Like
I
this isn't
know.
a this isn't an organization to be a part of because we test drive cars at our meetings. We have so much fun. Like I've even been telling my husband, he's actually coming to the Rivian
Oh,
test drive
that's
because
great.
because he's like, you're test driving Rivians. That sounds amazing. Like, and the soccer game, like, wow, you guys really have like an amazing events and just fun
Yeah.
things. Because other events, it's usually just like, oh, it's a meeting and you listen to someone talk, and
Yeah.
how unfun
Yeah.
that is. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not very fun. I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
can be, and it can be really educational and all that good
Yes.
stuff, but that's not really where you connect and network. And it's just
Absolutely.
so interesting too, because we talk a lot about networking in AWA plus D and in
Mm-hmm.
professional life too. And people are like, what is networking and how do you do it? And what I've realized in doing all this is it's just talking to people. Like
Yep.
it's not, I don't know why we have a whole separate word for it of this
Mm-hmm.
networking,
Mm-hmm.
because anything can turn into a networking activity, right? You can
Yep.
be standing in line at the grocery store and you talk to the person in front of you and it turns into networking.
Yep.
And I do classes with my dog. And
Yeah.
there was a woman in the class that was talking about a landscape designer that she had hired. And I was like, oh, did I hear landscape designer? And
Mhm.
I was like, who'd you hire? What are you doing? And so she starts talking about it. And I was like, well, I'm a landscape architect.
Mhm.
And, then by the end of class, this woman is like, so do you think you could look at my yard? And I mean, she has
Yeah.
this teeny tiny little yard, but I'm like, sure, I can, you're
Yeah.
in my dog training group. Sure, I'll look at your yard. And you
Mhm.
never know, like, who she knows or who she's going to have to come over that, her best friend, for all I know, may be a developer or may
Mhm.
have some like vacation home that they want redone. Who knows?
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Meg, it has been such a pleasure having you on from the Honeycomb podcast. Just hearing your story. I know I've been to so many meetings with you and I've never heard your story. So I'm really glad that we found the time to sit down, and I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story.
Thank you. When do we get to hear your story?
My story, I don't know if I actually have an episode about my whole full story. I think I like sprinkle it in, but I should kind of do like a whole story episode. Actually, that's a really good idea.
Yeah.
That is a good idea. I should probably do.
Story.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I actually have an opening for a podcast episode yet this year. So I think maybe I should do like a about me kind of because I've got a bunch of new listeners, followers. So that's a great idea.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Meg.
This has been thrilling.
Thank you.
I could just sit and talk to you all day.
Well, good. Well, I really appreciate it. And where can listeners find you?
Listeners can find me at mrcladesign.com. I'm also on LinkedIn. You can just search. I'm also on Facebook, Instagram, and that is it.
Perfect. I'll provide a link in the show notes so you can connect with Meg. Meg, thank you again.
Thank you, Katerina.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of From the Honeycomb podcast. If you enjoyed it, please take a moment to rate, review, and share it with your friends. To stay connected, follow me on Instagram at From the Honeycomb podcast, and you can support the podcast through the Patreon link in the show notes. And don't forget to subscribe to my monthly newsletter where I share exclusive behind-the-scene content and tips on running a mindful and successful architecture business. Thank you again for listening, and stay curious.